You've probably met someone like this. Maybe you are someone like this. They bump into a table and apologize to the table. They ask for a favor and preface it with 3 sentences about how sorry they are for asking. Someone steps on their foot, and somehow they end up saying sorry first. And when you tell them there's nothing to apologize for, they apologize for apologizing. It sounds almost funny when you describe it that way. But spend more time around these people, or sit with yourself honestly if this is you, and something more complicated starts to emerge. Because excessive apologizing isn't carelessness or a verbal tic or even just politeness gone too far. It's a window into something much deeper. A whole internal architecture built over years, sometimes over a lifetime, that quietly shapes how a person moves through the world. And here's what almost nobody talks about. People who over-apologize are often some of the most emotionally intelligent, self-aware, capable people in any room. But that same sensitivity that makes them remarkable also costs them something every single day. Understanding where this comes from and what it's actually doing beneath the surface changes everything about how you see it. So let's start at the beginning, because it almost always starts at the beginning. Think about what it's like to be a child in an environment where you're not quite sure what's going to set someone off. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't require shouting or chaos, though sometimes it includes those things. It can be as quiet as a parent whose mood is completely unpredictable. A household where love felt conditional, where approval could disappear without warning. A caregiver who was wonderful 70% of the time and emotionally unavailable or critical the other 30%. That 30% is where the brain does its most intense learning. Children are wired to attach. It's not optional, it's survival. And when the people they depend on are inconsistent, children don't conclude that the adult is the problem. They conclude that they are. That something they're doing, or not doing, is causing the instability. So they start scanning. They read the room before they even walk into it. They watch for micro-expressions, for tone shifts, for the particular way silence can mean something's wrong. And they develop a strategy, almost unconsciously, for managing the emotional temperature around them. That strategy, in many cases, is the preemptive apology. Say sorry before anything bad happens. Make yourself small before someone asks you to. Acknowledge fault before it's even assigned. It works, sometimes. And when it works, the brain files it away. This is how we stay safe. This is how we keep the people we need from pulling away. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a fawn response, a lesser-known stress response alongside fight, flight, and freeze, where fawning is the tendency to appease, to accommodate, to become whatever the threatening situation seems to need you to be. Pete Walker, a therapist who has written extensively on complex trauma, describes fawning as a learned behavior where a person essentially forfeits their own needs and perspective in order to manage someone else's emotional state. And the key word there is learned. Nobody is born this way. Something taught them that this was necessary. But here's where it gets interesting, and a little heartbreaking. The behavior gets so deeply grooved that it survives long after the original environment is gone. An adult who grew up walking on eggshells will still flinch at raised voices, still apologize reflexively when they sense even the slightest friction, still feel a low-grade anxiety when they haven't checked in with someone, or when a text goes unread for too long, or when someone in the room seems quiet. The threat is no longer there, but the nervous system didn't get the memo. And here's something worth sitting with. These people aren't weak, they're adaptive. Whatever happened in that early environment, they found a strategy that helped them navigate it. The problem isn't the strategy itself. It's that the strategy became the default response to everything, even situations where it isn't needed, and where it quietly extracts a cost. Now, let's talk about what it actually looks like in adult life, because it's more subtle and more pervasive than the obvious moments. It shows up in how someone asks for things they need. Instead of saying, "Can you help me with this?" they say, "I'm so sorry to bother you, I know you're busy, and I completely understand if you can't, but maybe if you have a spare moment, only if it's not too much trouble." By the time they've finished qualifying the request, they've already done half the emotional labor of letting the other person off the hook. They have made it easier for someone to say no than to say yes. It shows up at work, Someone points out a small error in a report, and they don't just fix it, they spiral into a cascade of apology and self-flagellation that makes everyone in the room uncomfortable. Their manager wanted a correction, not a confession. But the over-apologizer experienced the feedback as something much larger, as a signal that their place at the table might be at risk, that they have failed in some fundamental way. It shows up in relationships, quietly undermining intimacy. Because when one person is always sorry, always accommodating, always adjusting and shrinking, the other person doesn't get to know who they actually are. You can't truly connect with someone who has dissolved themselves to make you comfortable. There's a kind of loneliness in that for both people. Research out of the University of Waterloo and other institutions has looked at what apology does to our perception of the apologizer. And there's a counterintuitive finding that most over-apologizers would be devastated to know. Excessive, unwarranted apology can actually erode confidence in the person apologizing. When someone constantly says sorry for things that don't warrant an apology, observers unconsciously begin to perceive them as less competent, less assured. The very behavior designed to smooth social waters can actually create more friction, not less. The apology intended to make people comfortable instead makes them uncertain. But the person doing it usually doesn't know this. They're operating from a felt sense that the apology is necessary, that without it, something will go wrong. And the absence of disaster after apologizing doesn't feel like evidence that the apology wasn't needed. It feels like proof that the apology worked. There's a particular kind of emotional exhaustion that comes with living this way. Because over-apologizing isn't just a social habit, it's a near-constant internal monitoring system running in the background. Am I taking up too much space? Did I say something wrong? Is that person upset with me? Did I do something without realizing it? That low hum of self-surveillance is metabolically expensive. It consumes attention and energy that could be going toward creativity, connection, genuine presence. People who live this way often describe a kind of tiredness that's hard to explain because on the outside they seem fine. On the inside, they're running a constant audit. And here's something quiet and sad about it. Many over-apologizers genuinely struggle to believe they have inherent worth. Not worth they've earned through performance or usefulness or being agreeable, but worth that exists simply because they exist. Somewhere along the way, usually early, they got the message that their presence needed justification, that they were allowed to take up space, but only if they were helpful or easy or sorry enough for the times they weren't. This is why telling someone to just stop apologizing rarely helps. You're addressing the symptom and leaving the root system untouched. The apology isn't the problem. It's a signal, and it's pointing at something underneath that deserves real attention, not dismissal. What's remarkable, though, is what else tends to live in these people alongside all of this. Because the same capacity for attunement that makes someone hyper-vigilant to disapproval also makes them extraordinarily perceptive. They notice things. They read rooms with an accuracy that borders on uncanny. They're often the person who checks in on someone before anyone else even noticed that person seemed off. They carry a kind of emotional generosity that isn't performance. It's genuine. It comes from a lifetime of paying close attention to the people around them. They're also often quietly funny, in that particular dry, self-deprecating way that comes from not taking yourself too seriously. A habit born from years of minimizing yourself to keep the peace. They can hold complexity without flinching. They're rarely the ones who need to win an argument. They've spent so long prioritizing other people's emotional comfort that they've developed an almost reflexive ability to see multiple sides of any situation. The tragedy, if you want to call it that, is that these are exactly the qualities that make them exceptional partners, friends, collaborators. And they're the same qualities that have been turned, through old learning, toward a self-diminishment that doesn't serve them anymore. Recovery, for lack of a better word, doesn't look like becoming someone who never apologizes. Apology is a beautiful thing. A real apology, offered when something has actually gone wrong, is one of the more courageous acts available to a person. What shifts is the relationship with the reflexive, automatic kind. The sorry that comes out before the brain has even assessed whether anything warranting an apology has occurred. Some people find that replacing the reflex with a different language is a useful first step. Instead of "sorry for being late," "thank you for waiting." Instead of "I'm so sorry to ask this, I'd really appreciate your help with something." The meaning can be similar, but the posture is completely different. One positions the speaker as a person who has transgressed. The other positions them as a person in relationship. It sounds small, but language shapes how we perceive ourselves, and small shifts compound over time. What matters more, and what takes longer, is learning that the thing the apology was always trying to prevent, the loss of safety, the withdrawal of connection, the punishment for taking up space, is no longer the threat it once was. That the adults who made love feel conditional are not in this room. That the person across the table asking for a favor doesn't need the apologetic scaffolding. That they can ask for the thing, make the mistake, take up the space, and still be okay. That realization doesn't arrive through being told. It arrives through accumulated evidence, through small moments where someone says what they need and nothing bad happens. Through relationships where conflict doesn't mean abandonment. Through letting themselves exist fully for an hour and discovering the world didn't crumble because of it. It's slow work, but it's honest work. And the people doing it tend to approach it with the same fierce, careful attention they've given to everyone else in their lives, finally turned, tentatively and with practice, toward themselves. If you know someone who apologizes constantly, maybe resist the urge to tell them to stop. They've heard that. Instead, notice what it might be costing them, the toll that kind of vigilance takes. Because beneath all the sorries is almost always someone who has spent years believing their comfort mattered less than everyone else's, and who is trying, in the only way they learned, to hold things together. And if this is you, if you're the person who apologized to a chair last week, or who rewrote a text 4 times to make sure it couldn't possibly offend anyone, or who has felt genuinely guilty for having a bad day out loud, just know this. You learned something early that made sense at the time. You are not broken. You are not too much. You were just trying to stay safe in an environment that required a lot of effort to navigate. And you can, very slowly, learn something new. If you found something in this that felt true, I'd be glad to know it reached you. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. These explorations take time to build carefully, and your support through the Join button helps make them possible.